It began, as it always did, with a sound. Not a shout, or a slam, or a scream. It was the absence of a sound. The silence from Elena's side of the bed was a physical weight in the dark. A dense, cold space between us that had become more familiar than the warmth of her skin. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling where the faint orange glow of the streetlights painted shifting, skeletal leaves. I was 44 years old, and I had come to understand that the most profound damage is never done with a sledgehammer. It's done with a drip. A slow, persistent, maddening drip that wears away not just stone, but spirit. The drip's name was Mark. Elena's brother, 36 years old, was a master of the subtle sabotage. He didn't break things. He merely loosened the screws, knowing the collapse would happen later, when he was long gone and the blame would fall on the one holding the structure together, me. I remember the first time I felt the chill of his presence. It was years ago, at a family barbecue not long after Elena and I had started dating. I was manning the grill, feeling proud of my perfectly cross-hatched sear on the steaks. Mark had ambled over, a bottle of craft beer dangling from his fingers like a prop. "Not bad," he'd said, his tone implying the exact opposite. He leaned in, faux conspiratorial. "Just a tip from someone who knows his way around a kitchen. You might want to let the meat rest a bit longer next time. Stops all the juices from running out. But hey, for a first try, it's great." He'd clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture meant to be friendly, but it felt like a branding. For a first try, it was a tiny thing, a pebble, but he was a man who carried a pocket full of pebbles everywhere he went, ready to drop one into the still water of any moment of peace I managed to create. Elena, my beautiful, brilliant Elena, had tried to warn me. "Mark has good intentions," she'd said one evening, her head on my shoulder. "They just don't land well." She was building him a castle in the air, a fortress of good intentions, while I was being pelted with the stones of his reality. If I fixed a leaky faucet, it was, "YouTube teaches wonders, huh?" If I spent a Saturday painting the living room, it was, "A bold color choice. Hope you're ready to live with it." When I bought Elena a necklace for her birthday, a delicate silver chain she'd admired for weeks, he'd smirked and asked, "Oh, you're compensating for something." Death by 1,000 smirks. Our wedding day was supposed to be sacred. The sun was setting over the vineyard, casting long, golden shadows. I remember the feeling of Elena's hand in mine, a small, steady anchor in a sea of joy. Then Mark stood for his speech. He was charming, self-deprecating, the beloved younger brother. He told stories of Elena's childhood that made the crowd laugh, and then he lifted his glass. "To my big sister," he said, his voice thick with what sounded like emotion. "She's always had a big heart, sometimes too big. Well, here's hoping she picked the right guy this time." The "this time" hung in the atmosphere, a venomous little serpent. It wasn't a joke. It was a knife, expertly slipped between my ribs, aimed at the trust that was supposed to be the foundation of our new life. Elena had only had one other serious boyfriend, a brief, messy college relationship. Mark had reframed it as a pattern of poor judgment. He'd planted a seed of doubt in front of everyone we loved, watering it with cheap champagne. I tried, for years, to be the bigger man. I swallowed the comments. I laughed off the digs. I told myself it was for Elena, for the sake of family harmony. She was the sun around which my world orbited, and Mark was just an occasional, irritating asteroid in her gravitational pull. But I was wrong. He wasn't an asteroid. He was a parasite, attached to the very core of her, feeding on her loyalty and excreting doubt. The sabotage was never loud. It was a corrosive whisper, a quiet gas leak filling the house of our marriage. When we finally saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house with a garden for the daughter we hoped to have, he took Elena aside. "Are you sure about this?" he'd asked her, his voice full of brotherly concern. "Nathan's a great guy, but he's not exactly a financial wizard. This is a huge commitment. I'd hate to see you get in over your head." When our daughter Lily was born, and I was drowning in the beautiful, terrifying chaos of new fatherhood, he visited and said to Elena, "He looks exhausted. Hope he's up for this. It's not like fixing a faucet, you know. It's a real human being." When Elena, her eyes alight with a fire I hadn't seen in years, started her own graphic design business, he was her first call. I heard her side of the conversation from the hallway. "That's amazing, Mark. Thanks. Yeah, he's supportive. Well, of course I'll keep my finances separate at first, just to be safe. You're right, it's just smart."
He was always just being smart. Just being careful. Just being a good brother. And with every careful, smart, brotherly word, he was building a wall. A brick of doubt here, a slab of suspicion there. I was on one side, and Elena was slowly, imperceptibly being moved to the other. I tried to talk to her about it once. "Do you ever feel like Mark undermines me?" She'd looked genuinely puzzled. "Undermines you? Nathan, no. He's just protective. He doesn't always know how to show it, but he loves me. He wants me to be happy." "Does he?" I'd asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her face had hardened just for a second. Don't do that. He's my brother." That was the inviolable truth. He was her brother. The boy she read stories to when he was scared of the dark, the teenager she'd defended from schoolyard bullies, the man she'd half-raised when their parents were distracted by their own busy lives. Their bond was a sacred text, and I was a non-believer asking blasphemous questions. So I learned to live with the gas leak. I stopped mentioning it. I became an expert in atmospheric pressure, learning to sense the subtle drop in barometric pressure that signaled a mark storm on the horizon. And, most damagingly, I became his unwitting accomplice. I started applying filters to Elena, to her parents, to his parade of patient, hopeful girlfriends. When he'd had too much to drink at his mother's 60th birthday and made a snide comment about his father's business failures, I was the one who later said, "He's just stressed about work. He didn't mean it." When he'd borrowed $5,000 from his parents for a sure-thing investment that evaporated, and they asked me, cautiously, if I knew what was going on with him, I'd said, "The market's tough right now. He'll pay them back." When his girlfriend Chloe, a sweet, grounded woman who seemed too good for him, asked me if he seemed angry lately. I'd deflected. He's just passionate. He cares deeply. I was the curator of Mark's acceptable facade. I dusted it, polished it, and propped it up for the world to see, all while the real Mark, the corrosive, insecure, and deeply jealous Mark, gnawed at the foundations of my own life from the inside. I did it for peace. I did it for Elena. I did it because I thought it was the price of loving her. But every peace has its price, and I was about to learn how high mine truly was. The catalyst, when it came, was not a drip. It was a tidal wave of opportunity, and Mark's attempt to hold it back was what finally shattered my complacency. Elena came home one Tuesday evening, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide with a light I hadn't seen since before Lily was born. She worked as a senior art director at a good, solid firm, but her spirit had been slowly dimming under the weight of corporate compromise. "Nathan," she said, her voice breathless, dropping her bag by the door, "you will not believe the call I just got." It was a headhunter. A massive tech company, a household name, was launching a new creative division in Seattle. They wanted her. Not just wanted her, they had pursued her. The title was Vice President of Brand Experience. The salary was nearly double what she made now. There was a signing bonus, stock options, a relocation package. It was the kind of offer that rewrites a family's future. We spent that night and the weeks that followed in a state of delirious, terrified excitement. We spread maps of Seattle out on the kitchen table, our fingers tracing neighborhoods. We looked at schools for Lily online, imagining her in rain boots, splashing in puddles under gray-skied evergreens. We talked about the mountains, the ocean, the coffee. We talked about the financial security, the chance for Elena to finally build something from the ground up, her way. "I'm scared," she admitted one night, curled against me on the sofa. "Of course you are," I said, kissing her hair. "It's huge. But Elena, you were made for this. You're the most talented, capable person I know. They see it. I've always seen it." "You'd really be okay with it? Uprooting our lives? Your job?" My job was stable but unspectacular. A management position at a local logistics company. I could do it from anywhere or find something new. "This is your dream," I told her, and I meant it. "I'm in. Whatever you choose, I'm behind you 100%. We're a team." We were leaning so far toward yes that we were practically falling into the Pacific Northwest. The decision was taking shape, becoming solid in our hands. We started tentatively mentioning it to friends, their reactions a mix of shock and excitement. We made the mistake of mentioning it to her parents, which meant, inevitably, Mark found out. He called her immediately. "Let's get coffee," he said, his voice, according to Elena, laced with a concern that brooked no argument. "Just you and me. We need to talk about this Seattle thing." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "You don't have to go," I said. "He's just worried," she said, already grabbing her keys. "It'll put his mind at ease."
She left. I stayed home with Lily, helping her with the puzzle, the brightly colored cardboard pieces feeling alien and pointless in my hands. The clock on the wall ticked with a slow, malevolent patience. 1 hour. 2. Each minute was a drip of acid. When she returned, the light was gone.
The flush of excitement had been replaced by a pale, pinched anxiety. She moved through the kitchen like a ghost, not meeting my eyes. "So," I asked, my voice carefully neutral, "what did the oracle have to say?" She didn't smile. He brought up some things I hadn't fully considered." "Like what?" "Like the cost of living there. The salary is bigger, but so is everything else. He ran the numbers." He ran the numbers. As if Mark, who could barely balance his own checkbook, was a financial savant. "We ran the numbers, Elena. We'll be significantly better off." "And Lily," she continued, her voice dropping, "uprooting her from her friends, her school, her grandparents. It's a formative age. He said it could be really traumatic for her." "He's not a child psychologist," I said, the edge in my voice sharp enough to cut. "Since when is he an expert on child development?" "Don't," she snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He's my brother. He cares about her. He cares about me." "And what about me?" The question hung in the air, stark and raw.
She looked away. He said, "You've always been a creature of habit, that your routine is your stability, that being away from your support system in a new city where you don't know anyone, he's worried you wouldn't survive it well, that the stress would change you." There it was, the master stroke. He had taken my steadiness, the very quality that made me a reliable husband and father, and he had repackaged it as a fragility. He had painted me as a hothouse flower that would wilt in the real world, and he had presented himself as the clear-eyed realist trying to protect his sister from my inevitable collapse. I didn't yell, I didn't plead. I just stood there, watching the dream die in her eyes, replaced by Mark's carefully implanted fears. He had taken her ambition and twisted it into irresponsibility. He had taken my support and twisted it into weakness. He had taken an opportunity and reframed it as a threat. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Lily was watching cartoons in the next room, the cheerful, mindless soundtrack a brutal contrast to the devastation in front of me. "So," I said, my voice flat, dead, "what are you saying?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm saying, I think it's too risky. I think I'm not ready." She wasn't ready. She wasn't. But it wasn't her voice. It was his. It was always his. I nodded slowly. "Okay." That was all I said. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I went upstairs and stood in the shower, letting the hot water scald my skin, wishing it could wash away the feeling of absolute, profound powerlessness. I had tried reason. I had tried patience. I had tried love. None of it was a match for the toxic loyalty that bound her to him. That night, as I lay beside her in the dark, listening to the new, heavier silence, something in me broke, not with a snap, but with a slow, cold crystallization. A decade of swallowed comments, of explained-away insults, of polished facades and curated peace rose in my throat like bile. I was done. I wasn't going to yell at him. I wasn't going to plead with her. Confrontation was his game. He was a master of turning it into proof of his own victimhood. No,
My revenge would be simpler. It would be quieter. It would be the sound of me stopping. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. The chaos of the night before had settled into a cold, hard resolve. I made coffee. I packed Lily's lunch for school. I kissed Elena on the cheek, her skin cool and unresponsive under my lips. I performed the rituals of normalcy. But inside, I was a different man. I had declared a war of truth, and the first casualty was to be my own silence. The first test came that very weekend. We were at her parents' house for a Sunday dinner. Mark was there, holding court, basking in the glow of his perceived victory. He was talking about a new business venture, something involving crypto and NFTs, the usual miasma of buzzwords that signaled another impending request for a loan. His latest girlfriend, Sarah, a sharp-eyed woman with a skeptical tilt to her head, was listening with a polite but distant smile. She caught my eye as Mark expounded on the ground-floor opportunity. Later, as we were clearing the plates, she sidled up to me in the kitchen. "Nathan," she began, her voice low, "can I ask you something, off the record?" "Of course," I said, stacking dishes with a quiet focus.
Mark, he seems really intense about this new project. More than usual. He's been talking about taking out a second line of credit on his condo. Does that seem wise to you? The old me, the peacekeeper, would have woven a tapestry of excuses. He's passionate. He believes in it. The market is volatile, but he's a risk taker. I would have applied the filter. The new me simply met her gaze. I let a beat of silence hang in the air, a silence that was more honest than any lie I could have told. "Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "In the 12 years I've known him, Mark has started 6 different sure-thing businesses. He's borrowed over $30,000 from his parents, none of which has been repaid. He lost $5,000 of my money in a similar scheme 2 years ago. So no, I do not think it's wise. I think it's a pattern." I didn't say it with malice. I said it with the flat, weary tone of a man stating a simple meteorological fact. The sky is blue, water is wet. Mark is a financial sinkhole. Sarah's face didn't crumple in shock. It just settled. The last piece of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve clicked into place. The vague unease, the missed dates, the grandiose plans that never materialized, it all made sense now, framed by my unvarnished truth. "I see," she said softly. "Thank you, Nathan, for being honest."
She left the kitchen. I heard her make her excuses to Mark about a headache 15 minutes later. She never saw him again. That was the first thread. I had pulled it, and the entire fabric of his carefully constructed reality began to fray. The next opportunity came from Elena's father, Robert, a kind, patient man who had always looked for the best in his son. He pulled me aside in his study later that same evening, his brow furrowed. "Nathan, son," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I'm a little worried about Mark. He's talking about this new venture and, well, you're a businessman. You have a good head on your shoulders. Has he talked to you about it? Does it seem legitimate?" The old me would have thrown a life preserver. "It's a new space, Bob. High risk, high reward. You know how he is." The new me,
let the life preserver sink. I looked him in the eye. Bob, he hasn't discussed the details with me, but based on his history, I would be very cautious. He still owes you and Carol the $10,000 from the import-export idea, doesn't he? And the $8,000 from the food truck franchise that never was? I wouldn't want to see you lose more. You've been more than generous. The Roberts face aged a decade in that moment. It wasn't anger. It was the slow, painful dissolution of a father's hope. He nodded slowly, his eyes clouded with a grief I recognized. "I see," he murmured. "Thank you, Nathan." The check stopped. The co-signing stopped. The financial life support that had kept Mark's fantasy world alive was switched off.
At a company picnic for Elena's firm, I ran into a colleague of Mark's, a man I'd met a few times. He mentioned a project Mark was leading that was behind schedule. "He keeps blaming the marketing department," the man said, rolling his eyes. "Says they're not giving him what he needs. But between you and me, his briefs are a mess. No one knows what he actually wants." The old me would have said, "He's a big-picture guy. The details aren't his strength." The new me just gave a small, non-committal shrug. "I've found that clarity is everything in a project. If the vision isn't clear from the top, it's hard for anyone to execute." It was a neutral, professional statement, and it was a death sentence. It confirmed the colleague's suspicions, validating his own experience without me ever bad-mouthing Mark directly. The colleague nodded, a look of vindication on his face. I later learned Mark was quietly removed from that project the following week. I was a ghost, moving through his life, turning the lights out one by one. I was not the arsonist. I was simply the one who stopped hiding the matches and gasoline he had left lying around everywhere. I stopped explaining his drunkenness at family events. I stopped laughing off his rude comments as just Mark being Mark. When friends looked confused by a cutting remark he had made, I didn't jump in to translate, to soften the blow. I just let the remark hang in the air, sharp and ugly, for everyone to see in its unfiltered glory. The effect was frighteningly fast, like a building whose hidden structural flaws are suddenly exposed to the elements. It didn't collapse in a roar. It simply sagged, then crumbled. His social life withered. His professional credibility evaporated. His family's protective shield retracted. The charming, misunderstood younger brother was gone, and in his place stood a 36-year-old man who was, quite simply, an asshole. And everyone could finally see it.
Elena noticed the change in the atmosphere around her brother within a few months. It was a slow, dawning realization, like noticing a plant in the corner had died because you'd stopped watering it. "It's weird," she said one evening, frowning at her phone. "Sarah hasn't returned any of my texts. I thought she and Mark were getting serious." I was reading a book, The Picture of Calm. I didn't look up. Maybe it didn't work out. A few weeks later, after a strained family dinner where Mark had been sullen and their father had been uncharacteristically short with him, she turned to me in the car on the way home. "Does it feel like everyone is against Mark lately?" she asked, her voice small and confused. "Mom was quiet. Dad was almost sharp with him. What's going on?" I put my book down. I looked at her. at the genuine bewilderment in her beautiful face. This was the moment. The truth, now, had to be a scalpel, not a club. "They're not against him, Elena," I said, my voice soft but firm. "They're just finally seeing him clearly, without anyone buffering the signal." She was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "Buffering the signal?" she finally repeated. "Yes." I let the word sit between us. I didn't elaborate. She was smart. She would connect the dots. The process was painful to watch. It was a quiet, private grief. She went through stages. First, there was anger, at his friends for abandoning him, at his colleagues for not being understanding, at her parents for being harsh. Then there was confusion, a frantic reevaluation of 1,000 past interactions, trying to find the moment it had all gone wrong.
And then, finally, there was a terrible, dawning quiet. She stopped defending him in conversation. She stopped initiating contact. When he called, her responses were polite, but distant. The sacred text of their bond was being rewritten, and she was the one holding the pen, her hand shaking. The climax of this quiet unraveling happened last month. We were in the backyard, stringing up fairy lights for a small party we were having for Lily. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was a peaceful moment, the kind we hadn't shared in a long time. Out of the blue, she said, "He called me today." I didn't need to ask who. "Oh?" "He was upset. Said he feels like everyone has turned on him, that he's isolated." She clipped a light to the hook I was holding, her movements deliberate. "He asked me if I'd turned on him, too." My heart was a hammer in my chest. "What did you say?" She was quiet for so long I thought she hadn't heard me. Then she stopped, her hands falling to her sides. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a profound, weary sadness. "I didn't say anything," she whispered. "I just listened. And for the first time, I didn't hear my little brother, scared and needing protection. I heard a man who has been manipulating me for years. I heard all the doubts he planted about you, about our house, about my business, about Seattle." She swallowed hard. "Maybe he's been affecting us more than I realized."
It wasn't a victory. There was no surge of triumph, no feeling of vindication. Hearing those words from her lips felt like a surgical procedure. The tumor was out, but the incision was deep, and the scar would be permanent. She had seen the truth. The bond was broken, and I was the one who had broken it. We did not live happily ever after. We lived in the complex, quiet aftermath of a truth bomb. Our marriage was saved, but it was a different marriage. The constant low-grade interference that was Mark was gone. The static was cleared from the line. We could talk about the future without an unseen third party in the room, subtly shifting the conversation. We could make a decision without first running a silent diagnostic on how Mark might weaponize it. The air in our home was cleaner, easier to breathe. Elena thrived in the new silence.
She launched a new, ambitious project at work with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. She laughed more freely. She was more present with me, with Lily. The part of her brain that had been perpetually allocated to managing, defending, and worrying about her brother was now free. But it had cost her. It had cost us. Her relationship with Mark is now a distant, formal thing. They exchange texts on birthdays, they see each other at major holidays, and the interactions are polite, hollow, like two diplomats from countries with a fraught history. The easy camaraderie, the shared language of a lifetime, is gone. She doesn't blame me, not outwardly. She knows, on an intellectual level, that I simply stopped lying for him. But I see the flicker of grief in her eyes when his name comes up. I am the man who made her see that the prince was just a man in a cheap costume. I stole her brother from her, even if the brother I stole was only an illusion.
Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, I lie awake and wonder, did I do the right thing? Or did I, in my resentment, finally let a man drown who never learned how to swim? He is adrift now, alone, forced to confront the consequences of his own personality without the safety nets I had always provided. It is a harsh justice. It feels karmic, but it also feels heavy. I wanted to win my wife back from his influence, and I did. I wanted the sabotage to stop, and it has. But the victory is not sweet. It is sobering. I learned that the most potent revenge is not violence or loud confrontation. It is simply the withdrawal of your participation in a lie. It is the courage to stop applying the filter, to let the stark, unflattering light of truth fall where it may, and to accept the collateral damage. I freed us, but the freedom is housed in a room lined with the ghost of a bond that used to be, and the quiet, lingering question of whether the peace we bought was worth the price we paid. What is the line between protecting someone you love and enabling the person who hurts them? The answer is often the loneliest truth you'll ever have to face.